Welcome to today's webinar on partnering with single parents in youth ministry. I'm Chelsea Erickson, Youth Ministry Editor and Director of Publishing at Rooted, and we are just so glad that you could join us today as we have a really important conversation about caring for families in our churches across a range of family experiences. For those of you who are newer to Rooted and maybe not as familiar with our mission, I just wanted to mention that our mission is to equip and empower churches and parents to faithfully disciple students toward lifelong faith in Jesus Christ. And we encourage youth ministers to approach this goal from what we like to call the 5 pillars of youth ministry. Those are gospel centrality, theological depth through expository Bible teaching, relational discipleship, partnering with parents, and intergenerational integration. And today we really want to focus in on that second to last pillar of partnering with parents, although I think you're going to hear a lot of the others mixed into this as well. And so we really hope that that you'll kind of get a sense of gospel-centered youth ministry to parents throughout this call. I want to introduce you to our panelists, each of whom have really rich insight to share on this topic of single-parent families. And actually, I wonder if I could ask the three of you to introduce yourselves. I'll just quickly say your names, and then if you could chime in and just tell us a little bit about your ministry context and who you are. So today we have Anna Meade Harris, Isaiah Marshall, and Cristobal Tong. So thankful for each of you and the wisdom you bring as we engage this topic. Could you just maybe starting with Anna, just introduce yourselves a little bit?
Yeah, so I am Anna Meade Harris, and I am the Senior Director of Content at Rooted Ministry and the co-host of the Rooted Parent podcast. And I became a single mom in 2010 when my husband passed away, and we have 3 sons. They were 9, 12, and 13. Yeah, when he passed away. So I was a single mom, have been a single mom in the church for about 13 and a half years, and I actually recently remarried in May. God is always surprising us, isn't he? So that's me.
Awesome.
Thanks, Anna. How about you, Isaiah?
Well, my name is Isaiah Marshall. I am the Director of Ministry Development at Rooted. Started back in January. Prior to that, I was the youth pastor at a local Nashville church. Have about 10 years of youth ministry experience. Originally from Detroit, Michigan. Call Spring Hill, Tennessee home, married, 3 kids. And I grew up being raised by a single mom. And so my older brother and I. So yeah, this topic certainly has a special place in my heart.
Thanks.
I'm Cristobal. I serve in New York City in New York Chinese Alliance Church, Freestone. I'm the lead pastor there. And currently I also serve in Rooted in the Asian American Steering Committee. And I was also raised by a single mom of an immigrant family. So this is also something that's really close to my heart.
So thankful for all 3 of you and your personal experiences, your pastoral experiences. I know this is going to be a really rich call. So just to frame it up a little bit, according to the U.S. Census Bureau's latest population study, the one that I was able to find, more than 23 million children in the United States live in single-parent families. And that's out of roughly 74 million children, 18 and younger nationwide. So we're using that term children to define, children and teenagers. But that's a huge number, almost a third of children in the United States today. And at Rooted, we really believe that biblically, parents are the primary disciplers of their teenagers, their younger children as well. So in this webinar, we really want to encourage youth ministers to come alongside single parents and how to encourage and equip them in light of the gospel. So that's our subject for today. And just wanted to mention, we've been wanting to host a call on this topic for a long time, sensing that it's a really valuable way we could equip youth ministers and grow ourselves in understanding the gospel. And it just so happens that Anna has just written a book about this topic released earlier this year. So the timing was kind of perfect to talk about this topic and engage it together. And I'm in the middle of reading her book, which is called God's Grace for Every Family, Biblical Encouragement for Single Parent Families and the Churches That Seek to Love Them Well. It's put out by Zondervan earlier this year, 2024. And I just cannot recommend it more. Hopefully today will give you a little taste of what it's about. It is so beautifully written. If you know Anna's writing, everything she writes is beautifully written, but it's just a deep encouragement, I think, to those of us in the church who aren't single parents ourselves, but want to love people well. And then also, I think if you are a single parent, it will really deeply encourage you and make you feel really seen. So our hope today is really to allow you to hear from 3 different voices and contexts on this one subject that we think is really important, of single parenting. And Anna, in the early stages of your book, you outlined some of the key struggles confronting single parents. And I just wondered if maybe to kind of kick us off, you could highlight a few of those for us, give us the big picture of what it looks like to be a single parent.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. It was so interesting to interview other single parents for the book because, on the one hand, all the stories are pretty unique and different and personal. And on the other hand, there were some common themes that I just heard over and over again. And I think every single person that I interviewed, single parent I interviewed, spoke about being exhausted and overwhelmed. Those words came up over and over again. And I think it's important to remember when we're talking about single parents, most of the time there's a constant shortage of resources. And I'll talk about what some of those resources are. For single moms in particular, statistically speaking, money is a huge, huge problem. And, being able to meet the basic needs of children can be really hard. Women don't honestly usually have quite as much earning power, and they have even less when it's just them and they're having to pay for childcare, and if they're not getting any support. As a matter of fact, by some measures, up to 30% of single parent homes that are led by mothers are below the poverty line, and millions more are considered low income. So when you're caring for single parents in your church, it's really important to keep the financial piece of things in mind, and the stress that goes with that. Also with that comes difficulty, the shortage of time, for parents who are having to work full time. But even so, even if they're working full time and have support, just the amount of time it takes to do everything for your children, when you are the one who, runs every carpool and goes to every parent teacher conference and, has to take every pediatrician appointment, that kind of thing, it can just really be difficult to juggle all those things without a spouse. So time, we're always pressed for time, juggling everything without support or backup. I personally felt and heard the lack of wisdom pretty acutely. That feels like a resource in short supply, maybe because my kids were just becoming teenagers when their father died. But I really missed having a sounding board and someone to problem solve with. I was always hyper aware, and I think all single parents are, of all the ways in which you don't feel like you're enough for your kids. And not feeling like you can provide what your children need in whatever way that may be leaves you feeling guilty, and it leaves you feeling ashamed that maybe you're falling short all the time. And obviously, no parent gets a report card knowing how they're doing, but single parents really, they don't get any feedback at all, except from the kids. That's not always fun. And feeling like that so often can be really, really lonely. And especially in church, where it looks like everyone around you is married and it looks like everybody has the perfect nuclear family. And that made church hard for me and for my kids. And being at church with all the programs and the Sunday school classes and the retreats geared towards married parent families often made it feel like our family just didn't quite fit, not quite as good as everybody else's family. And that's not true, but that's what it can feel like. So that's
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think that gives us a really helpful lay of the land, and just hearing you talk about it, I think provides maybe some needed empathy, to just consider some of to think about some of the considerations that are there, as we shepherd people. Isaiah and Cristobal, I wonder if there's anything you would add to that list, or things you would nuance based on, the context that you've served in, lived in yourselves, your church context or area, Cristobal, you're in an urban area, so things have different flavors in different places.
Yeah, I think for me, being in New York City, one of the things that I see very often is really just Anna mentioned is the need for survival, is that much more apparent. In part because I think New York City is also a place where there's a lot of comparison, much more just looking around, sitting in the train, you'll see it right away. But another piece, I think, just being in a cultural context, more of an ethnic context, the guilt and shame part is a big part, of just like walking through the doors and having the courage to walk through the doors. In part, ethnically, where's your husband? Where's your wife? It's an incomplete family. And just asking that question, sometimes it really hits it on the head. So just being aware of that, I think, is another area that we need to be mindful of.
Just thinking about my experience and my upbringing, because I grew up in an urban context as well. And so a lot of what Anna mentioned, I could resonate with, having watched my mom walk through a lot of those things. And so my mom, sort of the backdrop of her story, because I think, stories are important and context is important. So some of her story is that my mom dropped out of high school and she met my dad. They got married, had my older brother, had myself. They got divorced when I was about 2 years old. And so for much of my upbringing, my mom was going to school full time, was working full time, in addition to raising her two boys. And as you can imagine, the weight of all that she was carrying without having a spouse. And when we think about that in the context in which we serve, is that a lot of the parents have these type of stories or similar stories. There might be variations as to why they're single, but they're carrying a lot of weight. And we growing up, we're not active. We were not very active in the church, though we were connected to the church, but we weren't very active. But I don't think that was because my mom didn't want us to be, but because, as Anna mentioned, she was just an exhausted mom. And I think it would have been huge and very beneficial had she had the support of the church that we were connected to. And so my mom not only had to walk through her own challenges that she was experiencing. I can remember my senior year in high school where my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so again, having to navigate all these different things, raising her kids, working, and then having to walk through this battle. Now, we didn't make it that much easier on her, as, two rebellious kids. But I mean, but she did it gracefully. And for me, a lot of faith was demonstrated by how she walked through those things, how she walked and battled through breast cancer, how she navigated the tension of, working a lot and also trying to love her kids and raise her kids. And so again, she not only had to bear the weight of the challenges that she experienced personally, but then she also had to raise two boys to become men. And so that was sort of my experience and sort of some of the things that, we had to navigate.
I think you're both highlighting, all three of you are highlighting how much I think like the stories that we hear from single parent families should cause us just to like cheer them on. I mean, they are doing, I think about my own life as a mom, I'm exhausted and I have a supportive husband, you know what I mean? And so I just think that these women and men who are doing this work of parenting and discipling their kids, I mean, their children will rise up and call them blessed, as you just did, Isaiah. But like we in the church, I think, should be their biggest cheerleaders and just trying to encourage and support however we can, because it is not for the faint of heart. I think, one of the things that Anna's book highlights, and just even reflecting on my own experience as a young single in the church without children, I think what what we kind of see sometimes is that instead of feeling that sense of encouragement and people cheering you on and people being in your corner, I fear sometimes that single people and especially single parents might feel a little bit on the outskirts or the margins of church life. And it's unintentional. I don't think anyone's trying to make it feel that way. But I just wonder if y'all could reflect on that a little bit. Are there ways in which our churches, even our youth ministries, might unintentionally um, increase that feeling for a single parent? We talked about some of the barriers that they already feel toward getting there on a Sunday or a Wednesday night or throughout the week. Um, are there blind spots that we might have, and how could we help our churches become more welcoming to these families so that we can cheer them on in the gospel? You want to go first, Anna?
Oh, I can. One thing that I heard over and over from parents was that they feared being judged at church. And in fact, some of them did have stories of overt judgment, people kind of quickly asking that question you mentioned, Chris. Where's your husband? As a matter of fact, I interviewed a pastor who is in Nebraska who was widowed and he had 3 small children. And he just said very bluntly that he felt he often had to do the single parent self-justification shuffle, is what he called it. And he said he could almost see like a cartoon bubble over their head, the wondering, where's your wife? And they were trying to figure out if they were the kind of single parent they should pity or the kind of single parent that should be judged. And I felt that, and I was in the pity camp because I'm a widow, right? I'm being harsh, but that's, it happened to me, in a sense. So if I felt that with my uncomplicated story, how much more do parents with a different story possibly feel that? So there's a real tension, I think, in trying to get to know the single parent and learn their story and find out how you can help, and also not make them feel judged. They're going to be hypersensitive, particularly if their story is painful and they're already feeling like they're not doing a good job. And so you just have to be so, so kind. And, I think our the rhythm of a church service where we're reminded of our sin and then we're given the gospel, it kind of sets us up to be receptive to other sinners, whether they're married or not, right? Whoever we're meeting in the church, we're aware that we're a sinner, they're a sinner. So we just love each other and accept each other's stories. Does that make sense? So when we're talking to a single parent and we're trying to get to know them, we come at them from a perspective of humility, and of brotherhood or sisterhood, just wanting to be welcome, wanting to get to know them and befriend them. So many single parents said they felt like projects, and you're just making a friend. You're just making a friend. They may have to happen to have a complicated story, but you're making a friend, and then you're caring for your friend.
I think something else that I think about is sort of like the expectations we place on the parent. For example, in the example of like, hey, make sure bringing your teen to youth group. Well, we put the expectation on them to bring their kids to youth group without considering ways in which we can support that. Hey, is there a family that lives nearby this parent that can possibly pick their kid up and bring them to youth group with them? And so thinking outside of the box where we can offer that type of support and not simply just placing that expectations on the parents.
Yeah, I was gonna jump on that because as Anna is sharing, it's like there's a little part of me where it's like I need to confess that I've definitely fallen into that trap where the program is what I'm focused on. The what we're doing that night is what I'm focused on. But then I remember very recently we had a little girl, sixth grade. She came to our church as part of an outreach, but then she started coming by herself. And every so often we would see her mom drop her off. And for me, it's like, okay, we did an excellent program, but my ministry motto is the parents need to be involved. Where's the parent? And so like my first thought was, where's the parent? But I didn't voice this, but in my heart, right, I wasn't thinking about, oh, what's the story there? Instead, it was, oh man, she's missing a crucial piece of this, and that's the parents' involvement. And so there's a part of me where I needed to confess that sometimes we're so focused on getting the program right and so focused on what the students get out of it that we forget behind there is a story. Behind there are parents who need support. And really from there, I think once I came to that realization, we had a team come around, really get to know the parents, see what their needs are. And so at this point, we have brothers and sisters picking her up for Sunday and then dropping her off afterwards, and also making sure that there's food, there's lunch. In part, there's a great need in that family. They're definitely one of those where resources are scarce. And she's coming to church. She enjoys the community, but at the same time, there are needs that she's not going to express. But after hearing the story, we know that they have. And so our church has, at this point, just come together. And I think part of it is just the awareness. But we're so easy to just jump to conclusions, especially as youth pastors who are like the program and what they get out of it matters the most, right?
I relate to that so much, Cristobal, like just you're under the gun to get things done for youth group, and you can miss the pastoral in the midst of that. Like there's a need in front of us. I've been there too. As y'all were talking, I was just thinking, I think sometimes our role as youth ministers is to be catalysts for the church body. And so it's not that we have to arrange every ride or every element in pastoral care, but it's like, okay, is there a team that could come together? Hey, I've learned about this need in this particular family. Is there a team that could come together to, have a sign up genius for rides? Like maybe there are a few people in the church who could help with that, and just come together as a team to support this family. And that's going to be really meaningful for them to build these other relationships beyond just with the youth minister always doing the kind of the organizing. Oh, there's something else along those lines. Maybe it'll come to me another moment. But the other thing I was thinking of is just, I think we have to be sensitive too, and y'all can tell me, reflect on this if you want to, but we have to be a little sensitive too to the different makeups of families when we're teaching. We really value Bible teaching, and part of that is talking about the family of God, talking about moms and dads and kids and all that entails. And at times when we had students in different family makeups and scenarios in our youth ministry, I would just sometimes realize like, oh my gosh, I have to be really careful how I nuance this particular. I mean, we're going to teach the Bible, we're going to teach what it says, but we have to be really sensitive pastorally to the kid sitting there who's just lost a parent, or whose parents have just gotten divorced, or who's never met one of their parents because there was conflict in the family. How we say things and how we approach some of those topics, and how we present what the Bible is teaching, from an aspect of care and a perspective of like loving the specific kids in front of us. It's so easy, I think, to what you were just saying, Cristobal, to be in program mode and to be in, okay, I got to prepare this talk mode. But we really need to be able to picture the kids sitting there to make sure that we're not doing harm in the way that we present something. So I don't know if y'all have further thoughts on that, but it's just one thing that came to me as you were reflecting.
Just the only thing I would add is there's a bunch of single moms in scripture. And when you're teaching about Hagar, the widow of Zarephath, or the widow of Nain, you can dive into a little bit of what that was like for her. And universally, God is caring for her and siding with her and ministering to her. So that's the heart of God for the single mom. And so you can teach that as you're teaching the other important gospel-centered thing. That is the gospel, So you can use that too.
Amen. Well, I wonder, so, we talked about a little bit, some of the blind spots. I'm wondering too, what y'all would say are some of the things that single parents and their teenagers really need from their youth ministers. We've talked about some of the practical, but what are there other specific ways that we could come alongside these families in friendship and especially to remind them of God's grace and Jesus? Is there anything else tangible, that you'd recommend or anything that we should say or not say to express our heart for these families and to support them?
I'm going to let somebody else go first.
Well, I think so. Like in the case of my mom, I just think about like what she needed or what could have benefited her. And one of the things that is abundantly, I guess, clear for me is that she could have used godly men in the church pursuing her sons. And this could be the role of the youth pastor, but depending on the nature of the ministry or how large the ministry is, maybe the youth pastor may have some struggles with that. But I think that's where that intergenerational integration can come into play. It's like, hey, who are the men in our church I can empower and encourage to pursue a young man, or vice versa? Who are the women in our church that can pursue and make and build relationships and nurture young ladies? And so I just know, my dad was in my life. I had a relationship, very distant relationship, so there was some challenges there. But man, walking alongside of a godly man, showing, hey, what does it look like to follow Jesus? And for those who feel fatherless, what does it look like to be a father to the fatherless and point them to the Father who is in heaven? And I think that was something that could have that would have been very beneficial. It's something that we can do as youth leaders.
Yeah, similar to that track, I think not specific to any gender or role, but really the ministry of presence becomes a big thing, because we talked about the busyness of single parents just trying to survive. But then there are a lot of things that are milestones in the lives of children. And unfortunately, the parents are not going to be able to make it. And this is really where the youth minister or the youth ministry, or even brothers and sisters in the church can step in, to be aware of what some of these are. We had a lot of graduations that just happened. And there were a couple of them where the parents just could not make it. And so we had brothers and sisters in the church go on their behalf. And these were like mentors or counselors. But just being present, I think, is a big difference maker in the lives of the children. And not only does it give them the sense that they're loved, that they're seen, that they're important, but also that the body is there. And really this notion that the church is not just on Sunday, but we are involved in every part of the body. And for me, that was hugely beneficial. I fortunately had the blessing of several male figures who discipled me, and walked with me through the hard seasons. When we're not trying to like one up each other here, but my mom also contracted thyroid cancer, and there was a season where she was in the hospital receiving chemotherapy because there was no one else that could bring her back and forth from the hospital. And so in that season, it was the families at the church that brought us dinner, that welcomed us into their homes, cooked for us. And then in the days where they could drive us to see her, they drove us to see her. So presence, I think, is a huge deal, and it's not that big of an ask, right? We have so many members in the church. Folks can take an hour or two out of it and just be present, right?
Oh, that's really amazing, Chris, what you experienced, and we experienced that as well. My kids had a phenomenal youth pastor who got that ministry of presence thing, and he shot baskets and he took them for ice cream and breakfast, and he also ensured that there were some other men that were around, and men and their wives. I mean, you don't just have to, send the man in, but the whole family can invite a child over and get to know. And that was the case for my kids. Yeah, our church did an incredible job. Our youth pastor did an incredible job. One thing I will say that I heard in a couple of the interviews that I had, that for a youth pastor who is, getting to know a child who has a painful um, family story, occasionally asking, "How's it going? What does it feel like? How I know your parents split up, a month ago. What's that been like for you?" Even if the child doesn't want to answer, you're letting them know that you're available to talk about it and that it's okay to talk about it. And it's not disloyal to your parents. It's not, you're not asking them to talk bad about their parents. You're asking them what it feels like to be you in a home where your parents have split up or your mom has died or whatever it may be. And so, I saw our youth pastor be really persistent with my kids. There were times when, they were teenagers, there were hormones, there were other things going on. They would kind of stiff arm the youth pastor. And, not only would they not answer those more personal questions, but they wouldn't hang out with him for a while. And then he would just periodically still text, and they all came back around. He just would not, he demonstrated that love that will not let you go. Like, I still see you. I know you took a whole year off from youth group and you come back. When you finally come back, I don't care. I'm so glad to see you. Hey, let's go shoot baskets, that kind of thing. So if a child goes through a season, a lot of times children who have had something tough happen with their parents' marriage, or don't know a parent, they can be angry for seasons. And for a youth pastor to sort of just absorb that and love them anyway says a lot. And that looks like the way God loves us.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I think probably a lot of us on this call can relate to being stiff-armed by a kid or two, right? And I think what you end up regretting is the times that you didn't reach back out, or the times that you let a long time go. You never feel bad about, in the end, about reaching out, even if they don't text you back or whatever. You're always glad that you did that. So that's a good reminder, Anna, of just, yeah, the love we're called to demonstrate. And thankfully, we have a different place to get our validation in life than from these kids, right? We have the gospel of grace that tells us we belong to Jesus. And if teenagers are mad at us, it's okay. Or if they don't want to be friends with us for a while, it's okay. So, but that's, yeah, appreciate so much what all of you have shared. And Isaiah, I think you had a couple other things we were talking about too. I don't know if you wanted to chime in on anything else, but I remember you
Well,
saying
I
something
think
about listening.
it does go back to a lot of what Anna shared about in Cristobal as well, about getting to know the stories, because I think with each parent there's a story, and that story is important. It's important to God, and that story should be important to us as well. And I know getting to know that there's a level of care, there's a level of connection, there's safety, there's trust that we build among our relationships and making friends with those parents, with those young people. I think will allow us to be in a position to provide support, because it's in building those relationships, is in getting to know those stories, where then they feel safe to communicate ways in which they would appreciate support. So yeah.
That's so good. Thanks for that word.
You want.
Yeah, and along with that, I mean, we know also that all families have strengths and gifts to contribute to the body of Christ. And I think some of the barriers that you all have talked about just shine a light on how it can be hard probably for these families to know, the ones who are walking with the Lord and know that they have spiritual gifts to share. There's probably a desire to do that, and also some barriers to being able to do that, just with time and energy and resources. So I'm curious if you all have any ideas for, the youth minister listening who's like, yeah, I can picture several families in my church, and I want to engage more with the parents. I want to develop this mutual partnership where I'm supporting them in their discipleship of their kids at home. I'm coming alongside, but also I'm inviting them to give, to give to the body and to serve in some way, whether it's in youth ministry or the church. What are some ways we can do that? And how can we be mindful of the particular needs and the strengths that families bring?
Well, I'm going to be honest. My kids did not want me anywhere near the youth group. And I wanted to because I was a high school English teacher and I love teenagers. And yeah, but they needed some space from mom, and that's okay. So I did things like, make casseroles for the retreat or send cookies and I got involved with the young adults instead who appreciated me. No, I'm kidding. But so I think there was a little bit of with the youth leaders, like, why aren't you doing anything? And I'm like, they don't want me, and so just I had to listen to my kids. And it wasn't that I didn't care. I just needed to be in a different place in the church. So that was one thing. But I spoke with several single moms who had been asked to teach Sunday school in various parts, either to adults or children. And two things I would say that every one of them mentioned. Number one, for a single mom who either got pregnant outside of marriage or is divorced, to be asked to teach Sunday school is such an affirmation of her spiritual gifts. And it's so meaningful. If that is a genuine gift that you see and just, it really means a lot to her to be seen and known as someone who has something really important to offer the body of Christ. So on the one hand, there's that. But on the other hand, they will go through seasons where they just do not have time and they don't have energy and they need to come to church to receive. And so I think if you do ask a single mom or dad to teach or lead, just be really aware that they may need an out and they may need it, urgently. And you need somebody else to step in to teach that Sunday school class. Yeah, because they just have limited bandwidth. So it's a both and. Ask them and then help them get out if they are overwhelmed.
I've had instances where it was a little different, where the parents believed that they shouldn't serve in the youth ministry because their kids was in there, not necessarily because their kids said that they didn't want them in there. So again, I think it also goes back to the relationship piece, where if we know the parent, we can affirm the gifts in the parent and we can invite them to use those gifts in various ways within the ministry, whether that's teaching on a Wednesday night or leading a small group on a Wednesday night or teaching a Sunday school, or it could be, something, if we recognize that they do have a lot on their plate, but would like to serve, there's also things that we can invite them into that are, not weekly volunteer opportunities. So the cooking for the retreats, or the chaperoning a weekend retreat, or assisting in hospitality in some way. I had a parent who within the ministry I was serving in, she would help me with event plannings. So administrative things, like whether it's name tags and different things like that, she would come along and she would help me with those things. And so it was allowing her to utilize a gift in something that was important to her, and she can use that in a meaningful way within the ministry, not having that full-time commitment within the ministry. So
Every youth ministry needs that person, needs that parent or lay leader in the church. God bless her. Everyone needs at least one of those. Sorry, go ahead.
I would just echo what Isaiah said. I think in my capacity in both youth and really the larger congregation is that I think part of it is partnering with the rest of the church, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be within youth ministry particularly if you see the gifting within the parent. But I would also go back to getting to know their story, getting to know their limitations, but inviting them, giving them an opportunity to say, hey, I am interested in doing this. Is there a way to do that? Maybe they're one of those parents, like Anna was saying, where the kids don't want them in youth ministry. But then you can ask the lead pastor, it's like, hey, is there another way that this sister or this brother could be serving, and then really partner with them, and then it becomes a task for the church and not just the youth minister or the youth ministry to welcome them in, but rather the whole body is welcoming them and affirming their gifts.
Yeah, maybe there's something they can do even while their kids are at youth group, right? Or, maybe there's a ministry that's happening at the same time, and that way they're not feeling guilty because they're out a different night, but they're all out together and it's a different space. So that's really good counsel to partner across the board at the church. We have one more question, but I wanted to just quickly, as we're talking about this topic, it just makes me think of something else that Rooted is doing that might be of value to some of you on this call. If this is a topic that you're wanting to lean into more, like how do I really support and resource parents? How do I come alongside them? How do I help others in our church family to do the same? And so I wanted to just ask Isaiah, part of his role is overseeing our mentorship programs at Rooted. And so Isaiah, I wonder if you could just give us a quick little primer on that for anyone who might be interested in joining a cohort. And then we've got one more question and we'll do a little bit of Q&A after that.
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, one of the mission of Rooted is to equip churches and parents to faithfully disciple children to a lifelong faith in Jesus. And within the family ministry program, that's what we are. That's what we set out to do. We are trying to equip church leaders to come alongside, partner with those parents who are the primary discipleship makers of their children, to equip them, to empower them, to encourage them to faithfully disciple their children towards a lifelong faith in Jesus. And so what we do as a 12-month program, and how we do it is we connect a more seasoned family ministry leader or family pastor with those who are trying to be equipped to reach parents where they are. And we have a curriculum that we have laid out that kind of teach, again, how to come alongside and equip parents in our churches to faithfully disciple young people towards a lifelong faith in Jesus. And so, yeah, it's an awesome program to help meet parents where they are, the tired parents, the discouraged parents. Yeah, so appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It just, as we're talking about this, it's right in line we have lots of resources available on the blog and elsewhere that talk about this. Definitely recommend Anna's book. And that's just one other way through mentorship that if you're looking to get a little coaching, we would love to resource you that way. So feel free to check it out on the website, excuse me. Well, before we move to Q&A time, I just want to, some feedback from you all who are joining us today. I just wanted to ask our panelists to share any last thoughts they have of just final advice maybe that you would give to youth ministers who are really wanting to partner with single parents and to care for their children and teenagers. Is there anything that we could say or do that would help them to know that we're their allies? And how can we really think about communicating the gospel to them? Just anything else that y'all would add that we haven't covered.
Well, I would say a couple of things. The first thing that comes to mind is whatever way you love the teenager, the child in your ministry, that is, you're loving the parent. Whatever you do for the child is gonna bless the heart of the parent. So you are giving to the single parent, especially those of you who are in really big ministries, and it's a lot to juggle a lot of people, and and it's harder to get to the parents sometimes. Chris, when you were ministering to that young girl, even before you knew the parent, you were already helping the parent. So know that you are endearing yourself and the church to that parent whether you ever interact with them a whole lot or not, because yeah, it means a lot. And the second thing I would say is single parents very much need encouragement. They just need to hear that they're doing well raising their children, because they feel like they're not. One mom told me a story of having to discipline her little girl at the playground, and she just felt like she was failing, that her child had acted up at the playground to begin with. And her friends said to her, "Wow, you handled that really well. You're a really good mom." And it just meant that she said it was the best moment of her single parent life, just to hear that encouragement. And I would add to that that single parents don't need pep talks like that. "You've got this, you're so strong," because you don't feel strong and you don't feel like you've got this. They need, "Jesus has got you. Jesus loves your child. You know, Jesus will carry you." They need the gospel. They need, you know, encouragement that stands up, that is real, that is trustworthy and true. And that's encourage them in who Jesus is for them and their child. So those are my last two nuggets.
I would say, and we hit on this, but there is something powerful in the pursuit of not only the young people, but also the parent. So continue to pursue. We may get the stiff arms from the young people. We may not hear back from the parents, but I think it shows that we care, that it shows that they are valued, that they are seen, that we want to connect with them. Because I think about my own relationship with Jesus, and that, thank God he didn't stop pursuing me, because as he pursued me, there was no instant surrender. There was some apprehension. It took some time, but he continued to pursue me, and eventually there was that surrender. And I think as we continue to pursue the young people that we serve, the single parents, they will come back around, as mentioned, and they will be very appreciative of that. And the other thing I would say is that God is looking to connect those who are resources, or who have resources, to those who need resources. And as Anna mentioned, a lot of parents need encouragement. They need support. So does the young people. But they need to be shown the love of Jesus. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to come along and join God in the work that he is doing in the lives of single parents and their children.
Yeah, just two real quick ones. I think one is, this is a ministry philosophy, but ask questions. Come with curiosity before judgment. And this is something that I'm learning myself, is to ask questions first, get to know their story, get to know what's going on. And then I think the second one is just being present here with this group of brothers and sisters who have been in those shoes, who have been in this role. I think for us who are leading churches and ministries, identifying single parents and then giving them the opportunity to minister to others, because it is really out of that experience that you can minister the deepest and the most. And that's where the empathy and all of that really comes from, because you've been there. And so invite them to partner with you. It's not really for us youth ministers or pastors to do all the work, but invite them to work with you and to bless others, because they know they've been there.
So well said, y'all. So grateful for just all the wisdom that you shared. And to those who are with us on the call, we'd love to hear questions that you have. I see one here from our friend Dorothy that I'll ask, but just as we have a few more minutes, we'd love to hear any questions that you want to add in the chat. And then also, if you want to brainstorm with us, we would love to hear from you. What have you found helpful in caring for the single families in your church? Or if you've had a personal experience in a single parent family, what's been helpful to you? if you want to chime in the chat, we could read some of those responses. We'd love to hear from you, just as we kind of think together about what this looks like in our local churches. So our friend Dorothy says, what is one way you were blessed by your church and or surrounding community in your upbringing with a single parent or as a single parent? I think we've covered some of those, but it would be fun to hear some others if there are like some specific stories that come to mind for you all about, just practical ways that your church has blessed you.
I'm just thinking of the meals and the milestones. Um, when my mom wasn't able to provide Thanksgiving meal or Christmas meal, it was the families in the church that invited us over. And it wasn't because they were pitying us or anything, but rather they recognized that they were in a better position and they wanted to be a blessing to us. And the entire time we were in their house, like we were part of the family. There was never any judgment. There was never any, oh, like we're giving this to you kind of sentiment, but it was like, hey, you're our brother, you're our sister, and we want to spend this time with you. So I think just being a part of that really filled up those holidays where I think most people, feel lonely. Like those are some of the loneliest holidays that we have throughout the year.
That's a really good point about holidays. Holidays, weekends, summer is so long. Those are the kinds of times when single parent families and their kids they get tired of each other. They need to mix it up by being with some other people. The single parent needs to have some adult interaction over a 4th of July weekend that's 4 days. That's a really long time when all the other families are doing their family thing and you don't have another adult with you, and you have to plan all the things to entertain the kids, and you don't have money, and yeah. So that's a really good point, that there are times where it means an extra bit to get that invitation. So thank you for mentioning that, Chris.
For me, I had a high school track coach who became like a father figure to me. Played a significant part of my life and my upbringing during my high school years. He affirmed things in me. He challenged me in different ways, but I think he saw something in me that I did not see in myself, and he invested in me. Not only athletically, not only did he want to see me succeed athletically, but he wanted to see me be able to contribute something significant to this world. And so he played a huge, and so a lot of times, especially during my high school age, where I spent a lot of time with him, and I think God used that in some significant ways. In fact, that my role in serving youth is I want to be, even if I could be sort of a little bit of what he was to me, that would be significant for sure. So
That's a really powerful picture of, I think, what we want to do for teenagers. That's really awesome. So we have a question here about single parents and depression or other mental health concerns, which I think, gosh, for so many parents and teenagers right now is a hot topic. But is there any wisdom that you all can give in terms of, when you see a single parent who's really seems to be struggling in some way, what would be some of the ways that a youth minister might be able to come alongside and support that parent and their family?
I was actually at a workshop last week, and one of the it was about single parent ministering to single moms, and one of the women there spoke about seeing a single mom struggling significantly with depression, and her going to the church finance, through the channels and getting her some counseling, And it made a profound difference to get that mom some counseling. But it was she's a lay minister in her church, and it was a lay minister who saw that. So that's another way that the church can come alongside, is to maybe the church has counselors on staff, but maybe not. This church did not, so they found her a counselor, and it made a huge difference.
Yeah, I think there's so many parents in our ministries who are probably needing that just like offer of support, whether they take it or not, to know that someone cares enough to say, hey, we're here for you and want to walk alongside you. A friend Tim has a great question that I hadn't thought about for this webinar, but I think it's so important. How do we help other students minister to students from single parent families? Like, is there anything that we can do as youth ministers, as church leaders, to just coach and guide and shepherd the kids in our ministry to treat each other, with kindness across the board, regardless of family situation or background?
I think for me, what I would say is probably talk about it. This it's probably one of those things where you feel might be hitting a sore spot, and you might be singling out some of the students. But like Anna was saying, there's scripture that throughout scripture there are single parents. Really use that as a springboard to have the conversation, to recognize that God uses all sorts of situations and people, and part of that has to do with the sin in the world that causes the broken relationships. God doesn't desire for these relationships to be this way, but they are. But in our part, what can we control? And that is being kind, being welcoming, being loving, being present, being aware. I mean, even myself, right? I'm like confessing here that I judged before getting to know the student's situation. And I think part of that is just having conversations with the students, with your staff, and even with yourself as you think about what's going on in your heart, to be aware of this. Because I do think it is one of those things that we don't talk about a lot. And that's why we're talking about it here.
What you just said makes me think of a book that I love for youth ministry by Dr. Steve King and Dr. Gary Parrott, Teaching the Faith and Forming the Faithful. I don't know if y'all come across that. You maybe in your demon studies. I feel like it's a big one at Gordon Cottonwell where Chris and I have both done some study. But they talk about, we learn from what's taught explicitly, we learn from what's taught implicitly, and we learn from the null, or what's not taught. And they say, oftentimes children and teenagers learn the most from actually what's taught implicitly, what's kind of implied in what we say, and from what we don't say. Like, that's what actually is going to stick almost as much as what we do teach explicitly. And so I think maybe, to your point, Cristobal, sometimes kids in our ministries that have a particular life experience are a reminder to us, oh, hey, we actually need to talk about these things, and maybe that's one of the things that that God's using to expand our view of what it looks like to teach the whole counsel of his word, and to share the gospel holistically. So that was encouraging what you just said. Well, y'all, it's been so good to be together. We really do just hope and pray that this conversation with these three wonderful panelists has caused you to think more deeply about the gospel of grace, about the welcome of Jesus, and the way that we just want to see that extended in each of our ministries and each of our churches. Our prayer is that you would feel really emboldened to come alongside single parent families, to love them with the love of Christ, and to receive that love back from them as they're walking in Jesus with you. So we pray that you'd partner together better as a result of this conversation. And if there are things on your mind after this that we didn't cover, we would love to hear from you. There may be angles on this topic that we need to explore further. And so it would be really fun. Anna and I in particular would love to hear from you and think together about how we could develop more resources to support you in the work you're doing.